Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, June 16th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Sources say the U.S. will enter Israel's war with Iran. So Scott Horton, who is the editorial director of antiwar.com, told me on Sunday morning that he has sources who he trusts who say that it has been decided that the U.S. will enter the war, the Israel-Iran war, with airstrikes on Iran. And I know Scott wouldn't give me something like that and want me to put it out there if he wasn't confident in his sources. So obviously this is very bad news, very concerning news. And he said it could start as soon as Monday. And really the reason why he wanted to get this out there was to get people calling the White House, contacting the White House to tell them no, to tell them that they're against this. And I know that might sound silly and naive, but people I know who are tuned in to this Trump administration, they pay attention to things like that. They pay attention to people on social media. And I know a lot of people might believe that this is all planned out, that this has been the plan from the beginning, and you may certainly be right about that. But I believe it's worth a shot because it doesn't take more than a few seconds to, you could fill out the contact form on the White House website. There's a link in the story here. I could put a link in the description. Or you could call the White House, the phone number for the comment line, and that opens up at 10 a.m. on Monday morning. Just tell them no war with Iran. Don't put U.S. lives, American lives at risk for this war. And because, of course, this could lead to very heavy American casualties in the Middle East. And then where do we go from there? Then it escalates more. Then it's essentially going to be a regime change effort in Iran. And so, as I covered on Friday night, the U.S. has supported this war by providing Israel with intelligence and helping Iran and helping intercept Iranian missiles and drones. But so far, there have been no direct U.S. attacks on Iran. And that's something that Iran has said would provoke Iranian missile attacks on U.S. bases in the region. So Axios reported on Saturday, and a few other reports said this, that Israel is urging the U.S. to join the war since Israel lacks the bunker-busting bombs that are necessary to do significant damage to Israel's Fordo nuclear plant and other nuclear sites that are buried deep underground. But this is the main one, that they need those 30,000-pound bunker busters that the U.S. has. And an Israeli official told Axios that President Trump had previously suggested that the U.S. could potentially strike this nuclear site. And Trump himself said on Sunday that it was possible that the U.S. would get directly involved in the war. So this is a lot of signs pointing in the direction of direct U.S. involvement. Trump is also saying that they should make some kind of deal, which is just kind of an absurd thing to say at this point because there were negotiations happening. Iran appeared to be approaching them earnestly. And in the middle of it, Israel launched this huge attack. And I forget if I said this on in the show on Friday, but I tweeted it. One way I foresee this potentially happening is like the U.S., Trump kind of making this big show of saying, we're open to negotiations. Oh, I hope, Iran has a chance for a deal now. Even though, the demand that they're making is essentially surrender to Israel at this point, which Iran does not appear to be ready to do. So Trump's going to make this demand for some kind of deal, and then after a couple days, he's going to say, "Well, we gave him a chance," and then order the strikes on the Fordo nuclear site. Break out the B-2 bombers to drop those really heavy bombs, and then where do things go from there? So again, hopefully, Scott Horton, Scott said he hopes his sources are wrong, but unfortunately he does not believe that they are. So another thing, I get into in this story is the fact that Netanyahu launched this war under the pretext that it was necessary to stop Iran's nuclear advancements toward a nuclear weapon. U.S. intelligence, the consensus of the intelligence community, which I don't like to use the term community for them because it makes it sound like they're a bunch of people like on a cul-de-sac or something having a picnic, when they're really the most nefarious organizations, some of the most nefarious organizations in the world. But the consensus of U.S. intelligence is that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, but Iran wants there to be consequences for U.S. and Israeli pressure and attacks. And one thing an advisor to Ali Khamenei, the Iranian supreme leader, said back in April, that one thing that could make them reconsider their prohibition on the development of nuclear weapons was a U.S. or Israeli attack. This is Ali, is that his name? What's his name here? Yes, Ali Larijani, who's an aide to the supreme leader. He said on April 1st, quote, "We are not moving toward nuclear weapons, but if you do something wrong in the Iranian nuclear issue, you will force Iran to move toward that because it has to defend itself. Iran does not want to do this, but it will have no choice. If at some point the U.S. moves towards bombing by yourself or through Israel, you will force Iran to make a different decision," end quote. So again, contact the White House. Again, it might seem silly, but let's just do something here to make our voices known, make it known that we do not want this war. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills senior Iranian official who wanted a deal with the U.S. So among the senior Iranian officials who were killed in Israel's initial wave of airstrikes on Iran on Friday was Ali Shamkhani, a senior advisor to the Ayatollah, who wanted to strike a nuclear deal with the U.S. In an interview with NBC News in May, Shamkhani said Iran was willing to recommit to its pledge to never build a nuclear weapon, reduce uranium enrichment to low levels, and get rid of its stockpile of highly enriched uranium in exchange for sanctions relief from the U.S. He said at the time, quote, "It's still possible if the Americans act as they say. For sure, we can have better relations. It can lead to a better situation in the near future," end quote. And President Trump actually shared this interview. This was, again, a story published by NBC News based on his interview. And on Truth Social, President Trump shared it, suggesting that he was open to such a deal. But the president and his administration continued to demand that Tehran eliminate its nuclear enrichment program altogether, a condition Iran made clear was a non-starter. On June 5th, Shamkhani reaffirmed that Iran would not give up its nuclear enrichment program and said that Iran was preparing a counter-proposal to the U.S. And another round of U.S.-Iran negotiations was supposed to happen on Sunday. That's when Iran was going to present its counter-proposal. But, of course, that's been disrupted and those talks have been canceled. So that's the thing. I mean, the U.S. didn't even get the counter-proposal before Israel launched the bombing on Friday. And then we saw Trump in his post, which I believe was on Friday. Yes. He celebrated the death of high-level Iranian officials following the initial wave of Israeli airstrikes. Trump said, quote, "Certain Iranian hardliners spoke bravely, but they didn't know what was about to happen. They are all dead now, and it will only get worse," end quote. So Trump has backed Israel strikes on Iran, even though his intelligence agencies have affirmed there's no evidence Tehran is working toward a nuclear weapon. You know, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, I feel like she has an opportunity to do something heroic if she doesn't care about keeping her job. You know, if she has the intelligence that says, Iran was not trying to make a bomb before Israel attacked. That could make a difference. But, I guess we'll see how much she cares about her job. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. sent Israel hundreds of missiles days before the attack on Iran. This one's from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. Just days before the surprise and unprovoked Israeli war on Iran, the U.S. shipped Tel Aviv 300 Hellfire missiles. An Israeli official implied that they were used in the assault. So Middle East Eye reported that on Tuesday, the U.S. sent 300 Hellfire missiles, and one Israeli official indicated that the precision air-to-ground munitions were used in targeted attacks on top civilian and military leaders. And he mentions that Shamkhani was killed in this attack. So this is one way the U.S. helped prepare Israel for these airstrikes, with sending a new missile shipment. All right, the next one here. Iran says the U.S. bears responsibility for Israel's aggression. This article is from Al Jazeera. So Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Israel's attacks on his country could not have materialized without the agreement and support of the United States. He said, quote, "We have well-documented and solid evidence of the support provided by American forces in the region and their bases for the military attacks of the Zionist regime," end quote. He said, more importantly, that U.S. President Donald Trump has publicly and explicitly confirmed that he knew about the attacks, that they could not have happened without U.S. weapons and equipment, and that more attacks are coming. So Trump has, started to send some mixed signals on Sunday. He said, "Oh, we had nothing to do with the attack." After he did multiple, I want to say like 10 interviews with different news outlets saying, "Oh yeah, we knew about it. I warned them. Told them, Israel has the best military equipment in the world because they get it from us." And then it seemed like he tried to distance himself from it a little bit on Sunday. But yeah, he said that he knew about it. He knew that it was coming. So Araghchi said, quote, "Therefore, the U.S., in our opinion, is a partner in these attacks and must accept its responsibility," end quote. Araghchi said Tehran has received messages from Washington through various intermediaries that it was not involved with Israel's attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities in Natanz. But he said Iran does not believe the claim due to evidence to the contrary. He said, quote, "It is necessary for the U.S. government to clearly state its position and explicitly condemn the attack on nuclear facilities. This act is condemned under international law, and our expectation is that the U.S. government, in order to provide its good faith regarding nuclear weapons, will condemn the attack on a peaceful nuclear facility and distance itself from the conflict," end quote. So Iran is saying that they view the U.S. responsible. So far, we haven't seen Iran hit any U.S. bases, but I believe it is a risk whether or not the U.S. starts launching direct attacks on Iran or not. If this thing drags out, if this war drags out, which all signs are pointing to it not ending anytime soon and this becoming a drawn-out conflict, that's going to be a risk of Iran taking that next step. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu says the war could result in Iran regime change. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday that Israel's bombing campaign in Iran could certainly result in regime change in Tehran. He made these comments in an interview with Fox News host Bret Baier, which, if you watch the whole interview, I mean, it's just lie after lie. It's just completely, it's just such a liar. Netanyahu claimed that regime change was possible because the regime is weak. He said, quote, "We are geared to do whatever is necessary to achieve our dual aim to remove two existential threats, the nuclear threat and the ballistic missile threat," end quote. Two U.S. officials claimed to Reuters on Sunday that President Trump vetoed an Israeli plan to kill the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So that's what Reuters reported, that apparently they're saying Israel was planning to try to kill him, and the U.S. said no. There's reason to be skeptical of these reports where U.S. and Israeli officials are claiming things like this, just because in the lead up to Israel's attack on Iran, there was a deception campaign that the U.S. and Israeli officials were involved in to make it seem like an attack was not imminent. So this could be some kind of psychological thing. I'm just very skeptical of pretty much any reports like this at this point. Netanyahu also claimed that he shared intelligence with the U.S. that Iran could have developed a nuclear weapon within months or a year. And I mentioned again, the position of the U.S. and intel agencies is that Iran was not working toward a nuclear weapon. But what he said was they could make a nuclear weapon within months or a year. And that's not, even based on his own timeline, that's not like an imminent threat of proliferation. The U.S. would still have had time to negotiate. And in fact, they were actually scheduled to hold a meeting on Sunday, 2 days after. So the whole pretext is phony, even based on his own timeline. Another claim that Netanyahu made was that Iran wants to kill President Trump, and he insinuated that Tehran was involved in the 2 assassination attempts made against Trump when he was campaigning last year, even though there is no evidence, zero, that Iran was involved in either plot. So he's just spewing lies on Fox News, trying to get the U.S. directly involved in this war. again, it is directly involved in a sense in that the U.S. is intercepting missiles and drones, but he wants the U.S. to get directly involved in the bombing campaign on Iran. So Netanyahu also told Bear that the U.S. and Israel have been fully coordinated on Iran. He said, quote, "I've been in constant contact with President Trump. We've known each other for many years, and obviously we informed our American friends and President Trump, our great friend, ahead of time. We did," end quote. So then the rest here is kind of background stuff, but this is what Netanyahu's saying, trying to get the U.S., again, directly involved in the bombing. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes on Iran have killed 224 since Friday. So Israel's airstrikes on Iran that began on Friday have killed at least 224 people, the Associated Press reported on Sunday, citing Iran's health ministry. So health ministry spokesman Hossein Kermanpour said on social media that 1,277 people were hospitalized as a result of Israeli attacks, and he asserted that 90% of the casualties were civilians. The bombing campaign has also killed multiple senior military leaders. So the U.S.-based human rights activists in Iran, this is an organization that keeps tabs on human rights issues in Iran. They're very critical of the Islamic government, but they've put out some reports about the airstrikes and said that Israeli attacks have hit military, civilian, and residential areas in 18 provinces across Iran. The HRAI said that as of Saturday night, it recorded a total of 215 deaths. The AP previously cited this organization, saying that 406 people have been killed so far, but so far that number has not been confirmed. You see the aftermath of one of these strikes here. You see a child with blood on the child, and it looks like a baby. And on the first day of attacks on Friday, when Israel launched the war, the HRIA, again, this organization, recorded a total of 678 casualties, including 35 women and children, and that toll accounts for the dead and wounded. So Iran's state-run Press TV reported that an Israeli strike on a residential building in Tehran on Saturday killed 60 people, including 20 children. Iran's IRNA news agency reported on Sunday that Israeli strikes on residential buildings have continued and reported that an unspecified number of civilians were killed and wounded. And this strike, this photo here is from the aftermath of a strike on Sunday in Tehran. So the Israeli air campaign has decimated Iran's military leadership. Among those killed in the initial wave of strikes were the IRGC commander Hossein Salami, Iranian Armed Forces Chief of Staff Mohammad Bagheri, IRGC Quds Force Commander Ismail Khani, and others. The bombing campaign has also targeted nuclear scientists, and reports say that 14 scientists have been killed, including some who were killed in car bombings. There was reports of 5 different car bombings in Tehran on, I believe, Sunday or Saturday. So Iranian retaliatory strikes have caused significant damage in Israel, and the two sides continue to trade attacks on Sunday. I'm recording this right now, Sunday night here in Virginia, so it's early Monday over in Iran and Israel. And it looks like there's pretty heavy back and forth going on right now as we're recording this. So maybe we'll check the live updates before I stop recording. But so anyway, so an overnight Iranian strike, this is Saturday into Sunday, hit an apartment building in Bat Yam near Tel Aviv, killing at least 6 people, including 2 children. And others are trapped under the rubble and feared dead. And another Iranian attack hit a home in Tamra, a Palestinian village in northern Israel. And that strike killed 3 Palestinian women and 1 13-year-old girl. So sources told Middle East Eye that the women were all from the same Christian family. And a video has gone viral online that purports to show a group of Israelis celebrating the Iranian missile attack because it hit an Arab town, a Palestinian town. And they can be heard singing the anti-Arab song, "May Your Village Burn," as the missiles are falling down from the sky. So according to the AP, as of Sunday night, at least 14 people have been killed and 390 have been wounded in Israel by Iranian attacks since Friday. So again, that's as of Sunday night, and we're seeing more attacks now, so the death toll could rise. But some serious damage from the Iranian missiles. You know, there's some pictures of buildings just totally destroyed. All right, so the next one here, Iran was not developing nuclear weapons, says Scott Horton. So this article is from News Nation. So Scott appeared on this show, and the host was horrible. The clip has kind of gone viral on X. He really put him in his place here. But this write-up is actually pretty good from News Nation of his appearance. I'll just read a little bit of it. The editorial director of antiwar.com is challenging Israel's claims that Iran was mere days away from acquiring nuclear weapons. Scott Horton, who is also the director of the Libertarian Institute, said those assertions have not been confirmed by other nations, including the United States. So he said, quote, this is Scott, what they had all along is a latent nuclear deterrent. It's the same as Germany, Japan, or Brazil, where they had shown they perfected the fuel cycle. They know how to make nuclear weapons fuel, but they're not making it, end quote. And Scott said, with this attack now, Iran is more likely to pursue nuclear weapons, whereas before they were actually not pursuing them. And he faulted Trump for pulling out of the JCPOA. And he said Trump could have gone back into the deal and called it the Trump deal instead of the Obama deal. So again, the write-up for this was pretty good because it just quoted Scott. All right, so the next one here, Mossad spent 8 months preparing surprise attack against Iran. So this article is from The Cradle. So the Israeli military operation launched against Iran on June 13th, striking nuclear facilities, missile sites, and senior leadership targets, follows 8 months of covert planning by Israeli intelligence and military agencies. This was reported by Axios. Netanyahu announced that the goal of the operation is to eliminate Iran's nuclear and ballistic missiles capability. And he says it will continue for as long as necessary. And according to Axios, the opening wave of attacks targeted around 25 nuclear scientists, killing at least 2, and now they're saying 14 are killed. So Axios claims that the strikes were prompted by a combination of factors: rising concerns over Iran's missile stockpile, intelligence on the nuclear program, and the imminent activation of a new underground enrichment facility. And so that was Iran's response to the IAEA Board of Governors resolution. They announced that they were going to start enrichment at a new underground facility. I had a feeling that Israel might have used that as the excuse to launch an attack. But essentially, this is saying that this has been in the works, and there was a lot of sabotage and drone attacks from within Israel that has been planned, was in the works for a long time, according to this report. And the Mossad has really infiltrated Iran. They pull off a lot of stuff inside Iran. If you remember when Hamas's political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, was killed while in a guest house. He was there for the president's inauguration, and they got him in the guest house that was guarded by the IRGC. All right, so the next one here, turning over to Gaza. The IDF kills 57 in Gaza, including 26 near aid sites. So Gaza's health ministry said on Sunday that Israeli forces killed 57 Palestinians and wounded 315 over the previous 24-hour period, as the Israeli onslaught in Gaza continues while most of the world's attention is on the new Israel-Iran war. So the health ministry said that another 8 bodies of Palestinians killed in previous attacks were also recovered. So among the dead were 26 Palestinians who were killed by Israeli forces while seeking aid at a U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution site, and another 117 aid seekers were wounded. This picture here is the funeral of one of the Palestinians who was killed while on his way to a aid site. So massacres of Palestinians seeking aid have become a daily occurrence in Gaza. The health ministry said that since the GHF began operating at the end of May, at least 300 aid seekers have been killed and more than 2,649 have been wounded. So some of the Israeli strikes that hit Gaza on Sunday, Wafa reported that at least 8 people were killed in strikes on homes in the Nusrat refugee camp in central Gaza. In Gaza City, 3 were killed by an Israeli strike on a crowd near the Al-Tufa neighborhood. According to Al Jazeera, at least 12 people were killed by Israeli shelling in southern Gaza, and the outlet also reported that at least 10 aid seekers were killed in the south and taken to the Red Cross hospital in Rafah. Tariq Abu Azum, who's an Al Jazeera reporter in Gaza, said, quote, "People have told us that the Israeli military did not warn the hungry crowds before opening fire on them, leading to devastating civilian casualties," end quote. So one thing that happened over the weekend, on Saturday, the Palestinian Telecommunications Regulatory Authority announced that internet access in Gaza has been restored after being cut off. The authority said that an Israeli strike on a fiber optic cable cut the internet on Thursday, which led to less coverage of the situation on the ground for 2 days. And there's just been less coverage in general. I mean, just because of everything that's happening with Iran and Israel, of course, but we got to keep an eye on Gaza. I mean, it's just the same horrific situation, daily slaughter, daily massacres of starving Palestinians making the trek to get aid, even though aid, I should put aid in quotes, even though they know that they're putting their lives at risk. I mean, think about how desperate you have to be to walk miles to a place where you might get a box of food, and you might get killed in the process, because every day people are getting killed making that trek. All right, so the next one here, the IDF expands Gaza zone to 70%. This article is from Will Porter. He wrote this for us on Saturday. So the Israeli military has called on thousands of Palestinians to leave Khan Yunis and nearby towns in Gaza, extending Israel's active combat zones to cover a majority of the Strip. Designated humanitarian zones have repeatedly come under fire throughout the conflict. That's the thing. There's really nowhere safe to go. But if you see the map here, this is where it's 70% of Gaza is essentially what is a kill zone. If Palestinians are there, the Israeli military will shoot and kill them. Just more forced displacement. They're just making life as miserable as possible for the civilian population. All right, the next one here. Israel tries to assassinate Houthi military chief. So the Israeli military has claimed that it attempted to kill Abda al-Karim al-Gamari, the chief of staff for the military wing of Yemen's Houthis, who are officially known as Ansar Allah. So Israeli Air Force spokesman said, quote, "Last night, while the strikes in Iran were ongoing, Air Force fighter jets flew over 2,000 kilometers from Israel and struck in Sana'a in Yemen. We will update later on the results of the strike," end quote. Hazam al-Assad, a senior member of Ansar Allah's political bureau, has said that the claims that al-Gamari was targeted were false, while a senior Israeli official told Ynet that Israel believes al-Gamari was at least wounded, and it was unclear whether or not he was killed. So the Houthis have launched frequent drone and missile attacks at Israel since Israel unilaterally broke the ceasefire in Gaza on March 18th with a massive bombing campaign. The Yemeni attacks have continued amid the Israel-Iran war, which was launched by Netanyahu on Friday. So Yahya Saree announced on Sunday, he's the Houthi military spokesman, that Yemeni forces launched missile attacks over the previous 24 hours that were coordinated with Iran. And this is the first time they're saying that they're launching attacks in coordination with Iran. And on Saturday, a Houthi missile fell in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, injuring 5 Palestinians, including 3 children. The Israeli military said that it did not fire interceptors at the missile. And Saree reaffirmed that Yemeni attacks on Israel would continue until there's a ceasefire in Gaza and an end to the Israeli siege on the Palestinian territory. All right, so the next one here, Israel attacks town square in southern Lebanon, wounding civilians. This article is from Jason Ditz. So when the Israeli conflict with Iran erupted on Friday, there was an immediate concern that Lebanon would be dragged into yet another war, and officials were quick to contact Hezbollah and urge them not to retaliate against Israel. Hezbollah reportedly agreed over the weekend with the government that they would not participate in Iran's retaliation, at least for now. There's still, Iran still has some tricks up their sleeve. There's more advanced missiles that they could use, and I think they could really ramp things up over the next few days if this thing keeps going the way it's going. But Israel is still launching daily attacks into Lebanon, though. That has not stopped. So on Saturday, Israeli drones fired 2 missiles at a town square in Beit Leaf in southern Lebanon, and 7 civilians were wounded in the attack, some of them in the vehicle that the drones were apparently targeting. So at least 7 wounded, no word on any deaths, but the Israeli attacks, ceasefire violations in Lebanon continue. All right, the next one here, killing of Alawites continues in Syria. So this article is another one from Jason. So sectarian violence remains a reoccurring problem in Syria, with reports that the nation's Alawite minority continue to bear the brunt of the attacks, though some killings are being carried out by unknown gunmen. Many are taking place at official government checkpoints. And that was the case on Sunday when a general security checkpoint between Mossad and Homs saw an Alawite civilian summarily executed. According to reports, those stationed at the checkpoint are asking people to verify their religion, and the man was shot immediately after confirming that he was an Alawite. And then on Saturday, a gunman in the Latakia countryside near Ras al-Basit killed 2 Alawites tending a flock of sheep, a young man and a 15-year-old relative. The young man's brother was also killed a few days ago in the exact same manner, according to the reports. So we're still seeing these executions. There was the massacres in early March where at least 1,300 Alawites were massacred, and that got some attention, but these kind of executions on a lower scale have continued, and this is in western Syria, but we don't hear much about it. All right, so the last story here, the U.S. deports Palestinians who landed for Interfaith mission. So this article is from Middle East Eye. So 2 Palestinian peace activists who were detained upon landing in the U.S. during a trip sponsored by a synagogue were deported from San Francisco on Friday. Friends and fellow activists have told Middle East Eye. Eid Hathaline and Auda Hathaline, cousins from the Masafer Yatta village of al-Khar in the occupied West Bank, possessed valid visas and after being detained had their visas revoked upon landing in the U.S. on Wednesday. Eid, an artist and photographer, and Auda, an English teacher and contributor to the Israeli magazine 972, landed in San Francisco on a flight from Doha, Qatar on Wednesday. The trip was sponsored by the Kehila Community Synagogue in Piedmont, California. The cousins were scheduled to speak at churches, synagogues, and other establishments as part of an interfaith humanitarian mission that was supposed to take them from California to Washington, D.C., and then to Boston. Eid had been to the United States multiple times on the visa he held. Auda had been issued a visa in May and was going to the U.S. for the first time, but they were detained on arrival, visas revoked, and deported. And they were not given a reason, but this is just part of the crackdown on voices that are critical of Israel. And one way that they can do that is by deporting people and revoking their visas. Again, one of them had been in the U.S. a whole bunch. I mean, they're going to a synagogue. Are they, I'm curious to see, maybe I should try asking the State Department the justification for this. They're going to claim they're anti-Semitic, even though they were on their way to a synagogue. All right, so that is it for the news. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Aaron Mate. Trump's pretend diplomacy enabled Israel's war on Iran. One from David Stockman. America first, we hardly knew ya. One from Caitlin Johnstone. Refresher on rules for discussing Israeli wars. One from Gregory Shupak. Syrian bloodbath from nefarious to benign. And our spotlight is from Trita Parsi. Trump must not cave to Israeli demands for help. So please go check all of that out. Again, contact the White House, make noise on social media, be loud about it. I think I might have said earlier in the show that people who are pretty tuned into the Trump administration say that they do pay attention to this stuff. So it doesn't hurt. And again, just, make as much noise as you can. Call your representative, your congressman, your senator. Tell them you don't want war with Iran. Anyway, if you notice, the scenery is a little different in here. I'm in front of a blank wall. I had to move my office. My 3-year-old kicked me out of the old one. We're putting his bedroom in there. But I'm going to put some pictures up, and it'll look nice behind me. Anyway, what else? Is there anything else I need to say? I think that's it. You can always support this show by sharing it, like, subscribe, comment. All that stuff helps out. If you want to make a monetary donation to antiwar.com, you can go to antiwar.com/donate. Follow us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, X.com, and all that stuff. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.